guilty of getting murdered with words. Y'all are outgunned, go home nerds.
Hermit gang, 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 hermit gang,
climb up there and lay down
hermit gang, hermit gang, hermit gang, hermit gang, hermit gang.
You think you can stop the symmetry that's false? Your team is dialing for help, but I'm ignoring their calls. And when their bodies dissolve, you know that forces on a killing spree. Gotta stab my PDP and perish painfully. I'm the queen of hearts, heads and body parts. Shaman on my competitor. My martial arts, I'll send a poison dart. Then you can drink your final breath. G teams name will be the only thing left.
Spinators, animated, redstone innovator. My behavior's crazy, can't be seen. Impulsive, lazy, tango, why would you retreat? Now my scope is aiming better. Run from cover from all the gaspels that I be taming. Without a sound, without no hesitation, my creations are amazing. Better watch your step, or the G team will end up blazing. Who's the better team? There is no controversy, but before it's said and done, y'all be begging us for mercy.
The general features of these reported abductions are very similar to events reported in much earlier times, such as the fairy folklore, the British Isles,
I ain't gonna give it to you, I'm gonna give it to you, ain't gonna give it to you. What? Lyrical boxing, dropping blows on all my bows in the G team, they're looking unclean, needing some sunscreen. I words for hurt, it hurt a nerd to subserve how my rhymes got them injured. Danger, danger, I got lasers to cut them up like razors, it's flexing system and I got this flavour. Weak defences like trenches and fences that these dense heads are presenting. They're presenting them alright. They're not very good, I could walk over that, I could jump over that, I could use an ender pearl, use my elytra. Come on G team, G.
Taken place in the Falcon Lake Woods in Manitoba. Stan, when referring to seeing Stefan, stated, and I quote, I recall seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked very pale. When I walked into the bedroom, there was a huge stink like a real horrible aroma of sulphur and burnt water. It was all around, and it was coming out of his pores. It was really bad. Former military policeman turned industrial mechanic and amateur geologist Stefan Michalak would often venture into the wilderness in the areas around Falcon Lake in search of quartz and silver. In May of 1967, Stefan set out to investigate the area and I used to climb up there and lay down and look up at the sky through the back window, and I saw this this white light. It was kind of following us in the sky, and it started getting closer and closer to us.
Throughout history, many people all over the world have reported seeing unidentified objects in the skies. Strangely, these objects have also featured in various paintings throughout the centuries, including the famous Madonna with Saint Giovannino painting from the 15th century. Recorded sightings, however, are not where this phenomenon ends. Many individuals all around the globe have claimed that they have been taken against their will on board unusual flying craft and examined in very strange environments. Researchers have outlined in the past that the general features of these reported abductions are very similar to events reported in much earlier times, such as the fairy folklore of the British Isles. Other cultures around the world have also spoken of gods and spirits who occasionally take humans, often accompanied by periods of missing time, which has been present in many cases of these encounters. Now, let's examine the first case where an abduction did not take place, but physical evidence of something very unusual did. This encounter is perhaps one of the world's best known and detailed UFO encounters. In May of 1967, Stan Michalak vividly remembers when his father, Stefan Michalak, returned home unwell and injured after something highly unusual seemed to have taken place in the Falcon Lake Woods in Manitoba. Stan, when referring to seeing Stefan, stated, and I quote, I recalled seeing him in bed. He didn't look good at all. He looked very pale. When I walked into the bedroom, there was a huge stink in the room, like a real horrible aroma of sulphur and burnt motor. It was all around, and it was coming out of his pores. It was really bad. Former military policeman turned industrial mechanic and amateur geologist Stefan Michalak would often venture into the wilderness in the areas around Falcon Lake in search of quartz and silver. In May of 1967, Stefan set out to investigate the area, and on the 20th, Stefan discovered a vein of quartz along the Precambrian Shield area. At this point, Stefan reported being taken aback as the surrounding geese began to go crazy. According to Stefan, he looked up and detailed seeing two cigar-shaped objects, each with a reddish glow hovering around 45 meters away. One then descended, and Stefan said that it landed on a flat section of rock and seemed to take on a more of a disc shape, while the other remained in the air for a few minutes before taking off. Stefan's initial thoughts were that it must be a secret US military experimental craft and would sit down to sketch it over the next 30 minutes. Unfortunately, Stefan would come to make a mistake. He decided to approach whatever this thing was and recalled that the air felt warm and that he could smell sulfur as he approached, along with the sound of hissing. Stefan reported that during his approach, a door opened on the side and he saw bright lights inside.
Every aspect of modern astronomy was known and was devised by the Sumerians. Literally thousands of tablets dealing with astronomy were found. Some tablets give distances between the planets, extremely accurate distances between the planets. And the question is not only how could the Sumerians know that or measure those distances, what for? What did they need to know the distances between the planets if they lived in some corner of the earth called Mesopotamia?
The zoo hypothesis is an attempt to answer the Fermi paradox, which is named after physicist Enrico Fermi. This paradox details the contradiction between the lack of evidence and high probability estimates for the existence of extraterrestrial civilizations. The zoo hypothesis is named as such as it suggests that all life on Earth may be similar to that of an animal zoo with the same principle of look but don't touch. This would mean that advanced extraterrestrial civilizations are advanced enough to know of our existence but don't attempt to make contact with our primitive civilization. However, there is another theory that proposes something similar but is far more mysterious and could be considered somewhat unsettling. Now, apart from the zoo hypothesis, two popular theories exist which try to explain the origins of how mankind came to be. They are known as creationism and evolution, and while they may be the most widespread theories, there is another, less known but still highly discussed. That is, the idea that humanity's inception as intelligent beings is as a result of extraterrestrial genetic manipulation on a less advanced mankind during our ancient past. Understandably, this theory may sound far-fetched, but researchers such as Zacharias Sitchin believe that humanity had been genetically engineered to work as slaves in our ancient past.
As far as berries and mushrooms, I think it's a key point that too many people disappear in conjunction with them searching for those berries or mushrooms, and there does appear some kind of strange and unusual connection between the two. It's very strange. I mean, you can't attribute it to bears. You can't attribute it to mountain lions because they don't find mountain lion tracks. Because when search and rescue people go in and look, they look for these locations, they look for these indicators, and they're never found. Tracks are never seen.
Former detective and author of the Missing 411 series, David Paulides has researched many cases of individuals seeming to vanish under very unusual circumstances that you may not expect. Paulides was first approached by two off-duty park rangers who asked him to look into the number of people who mysteriously go missing in the national park system without much of a follow-up. This led Paulides and his Can-Am missing team down a bizarre rabbit hole of very strange disappearances that they never expected to find. As Politis and his team scoured through thousands of these missing person cases, they noticed that many disappearances seemed to cluster in various locations and began to fit within some very unique profiles. Firstly, it's important to note that Politis and his team rule out any cases where evidence exists of animal predation, mental health issues, or suicidal intent, a person deliberately wanting to walk away from their life, a crime, or a drowning. Those that are ruled out are not included, and we are left with some unique factors of those that go missing, including these disappearances take place in a rural setting. Sniffer dogs behave strangely and can't pick up a scent. Those that return often do so with a fever that physicians can't find a reason for. Those that are found are often only semi-conscious and have absolutely no idea what happened. Law enforcement often come to the conclusion that a kidnapping must have taken place, but can't figure out a motive, and then when the missing are found they are dry, even during heavy precipitation, despite there being a lack of shelter. Pieces of clothing are often missing, most notably the shoes. And, as we will emphasise and focus on throughout this video, berry picking, which at first may sound ridiculous, but the fact that berries and berry bushes play a continuous role in many of the disappearances is overwhelming. Now with that being said, let's review the first bizarre disappearance, documented by Politis himself and paraphrased from his Missing 411 Eastern United States book. Please visit the description for all of the sources and a link to support David by purchasing his books. On the 6th of July 1928, 2-year-old Eddie Hamilton lived with his parents in the town of Elrose, located within Saskatoon, Canada. Eddie's parents had decided to go on a berry picking trip just south of their hometown, and all three of them drove down to the location. As they exited the car, they were surrounded on all sides by thick berry bushes, and Eddie walked off towards one of the nearby bushes. At this point, Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton reported that Eddie had momentarily wandered from their sight around a bush, and that was the last time Eddie was ever seen. It's interesting to note that Politis detailed that the area in which the Hamiltons had chosen to go berry picking was completely flat ground for 3 miles to the south up to the White Bear Hills that surrounded White Bear Lake. He also noted that there were 3 small lakes which were very narrow and all of them surrounded by hills. These were the only hills anywhere near the family. Once Eddie had wandered from their sight, his parents had called for him to come back, but there was nothing but silence. Obviously, beginning to panic now, the Hamiltons began to shout Eddie's name and started to search for the boy. They never received an answer, and they proceeded to search the area multiple times, but never found him. Mr. and Mrs. Hamilton then split up. The husband remained and continued to search, while the wife travelled to seek help. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived on the scene quickly, and before dusk a large search was already underway. Search and rescue teams arrived in force with over 250 searchers out looking for the boy and worked around the clock. Planes had also been deployed for low flight passes in an attempt to see ground movement, but none was ever discovered. Authorities would reveal that searchers had found both boot prints and heel prints, and noted that while there were footprints in the vicinity, after scouring the entire area no further clues were found. As far as I'm able to tell, this was the largest search effort in the history of the province, which lasted over 3 months, and nothing was ever found. There was no clothing, no more footprints, no witnesses, and since almost 2,000 people were out searching and were unable to find a single trace of the boy, it was deemed very unusual. Now, this is where things get bizarre. On October the 25th, 1928, a travelling salesman was out duck hunting roughly 3.5 miles from where Eddie vanished. The man discovered Eddie's body floating in White Bear Lake, which was positively identified by the parents shortly afterwards. Politis goes on to make some very interesting points. Firstly, to get into that lake would mean that Eddie would have to have climbed over an 1,800-foot mountain, walked down into a valley and then into the water. Think this through carefully. That would mean that Eddie, a 2-year-old boy, walked over 3 miles through thickets, brush and over a mountain without ever hearing his parents' calls or any of the searchers for that matter. That fact alone is just baffling and very hard to believe. So what happened here? Was Eddie taken by something, and if so, what? there was no evidence left behind to suggest anything to do with animal predation. This case has never been solved and has been constantly referred to as highly unusual and out of the ordinary. Moving on, let's review another case. On the 5th of September 1935, 5-year-old Jack Pike and his family went on a trip from their home in St. Vital, Manitoba to an area near St. Norbert to pick blueberries. The family got out of the car and Jack ran towards one of the nearby bushes and was out of sight for a very short time. Mrs. Pike described, and I quote, that she heard her son scream as if he was terrified. The scream seemed to be choked off in the middle. Mrs. Pike ran roughly 100 yards towards the scream, but found absolutely nothing. At this point, the husband joined the scene, and together they began to frantically search the area, but couldn't find a single trace of Jack anywhere. After their unsuccessful search, the authorities were quickly made aware of the situation, and this would begin the largest search in the history of Manitoba at the time. This search lasted 4 days and saw over 2,000 searchers scouring the river, riverbanks, bushes, trees, and a very large area of land, which again proved to be unsuccessful. On the 4th day, however, a searcher noticed Jack on the opposite riverbank. He was unconscious but alive. Jack was then rushed to hospital, where he received treatment including stimulants and a blood transfusion from his father. Doctors thought that things were looking up, as at one point Jack woke up and said hi to his father, but unfortunately Jack passed away only hours later. Afterwards, questions began to arise about the nature of the disappearance. Searchers expressed their confusion as to how Jack could have possibly made his way across the river to hide under a bush, given the distance from the location of the disappearance. They were astonished that he was somehow able to make it that far and survive long enough. Authorities went on to express the concern about the fact that it seemed as though Jack must have been abducted, but they could find absolutely no evidence that this was the case. Some questions remain here. Something obviously terrified Jack. What was it? Notably, Mrs. Pike only ever mentioned her son's screams and no animal roars, so what happened here? What was the motive for an abduction, given that he was found in the area? It's difficult to understand, but remains a very unusual and unsolved case. What do you think happened here? Now, let's examine a couple of shorter incidents. On the morning of July the 25th, 1902, 55-year-old Riley Armsber had just finished his breakfast and headed out into the fields to tend to his farmlands. As far as I can tell, Riley was a healthy man in good shape and stuck to a very tight schedule. He would tend to his land before heading back to his home for lunch, but on this particular day, Riley never came home to his wife. Now, while Riley was not exclusively picking berries, witnesses stated that he must have been taking a break as they saw him at a berry patch picking and eating berries at 10 AM that morning. This would be the last time anyone ever saw Riley. The local sheriff organised a search effort and had over 75 people scouring Riley's land and the nearby woods for him, but no trace of him was ever found. There wasn't a single clue as to what happened. The authorities and newspapers at the time continually described this case as mysterious and had no idea why they couldn't find even a single trace of Riley. It was almost as if he had just vanished into thin air. I find the berry picking aspect absolutely fascinating because it seems to me that when picking berries, your guard is lowered. Perhaps that window of opportunity is all that is required for whatever is taking place here. Still, it's bizarre that no trace was ever found. Here's another. On the 15th of August, 1957, Richard Craig was with his parents picking huckleberries roughly 25 miles south of Mount Adams in Washington near Trout Lake. They were 40 miles north of Hood River and the Columbia River and were situated at a 2,500 foot elevation. On this particular day, the family were picking berries and Richard had moved onto a nearby bush where the parents lost sight of him. Shortly thereafter, they went to retrieve their son but couldn't locate the boy anywhere. After conducting an unsuccessful search, the parents went to the local Forest Service office and asked for assistance. The search would last 2 days, including sniffer dogs, law enforcement officials and many volunteers. On the second day, there were over 600 searchers out looking for Richard. In fact, there were so many people out searching that Politis noted that the authorities closed the Trout Lake area as the people in the area were getting in the way of the search effort. At 5:30 AM on the third day, a logging crew was recruited into the search effort as they had a day off. The team searched and located the boy over 5 miles away from the location of the disappearance. Interestingly, they detailed that the boy was missing one of his shoes, and the doctors were also astonished at the boy's condition. They said that he was in fantastic shape and couldn't believe the condition he was in, given that he was supposed to have been in the wilderness for over 2 days. Unfortunately, Richard was never able to share just how he got lost or what occurred during those 2 days, which is a common condition of many of the people who go missing under strange circumstances and are found. Now, this next incident is very strange and doesn't involve berry picking, but does involve berries themselves. In June of 1868, 3-year-old Katie Flynn and her mother made the trip from their home to her father's lumber camp in the forest just outside of Walhalla, Michigan. Katie's father, Henry Flynn, was tasked with driving a team of horses that carried lumber up the hill to the mill, who would offload the lumber and repeat the process. During this visit, Henry let Katie ride the horse up to the hill to the mill, who would then dismount and run back down to him on the adjacent trail. Only, during one of these trips, Katie Flynn never returned. At the time, the mother thought that Katie was with Henry, while Henry assumed that she must have stopped wanting to ride the horses and had stayed with her mother. Henry finished up with his work that day and returned home to his wife and discovered that Katie was missing, which would initiate a search for the missing girl. The search teams began to gather at the scene, and Henry checked the path that Katie took and noticed that her tracks slowly merged with the path of a huge black bear. 2 hunters wandered into the camp and after speaking with Henry offered to assist in the search. These men searched the entire night until the early morning, when they gave up after finding no trace at all of Katie. During the next morning, Henry and a group of searchers began searching once more for Katie, and at around 4 PM they heard what was described as a feeble cry coming from a dense build-up of bushes. The searchers made their way towards the sounds and beyond towards a river. Just as the men reached the river, they saw what they thought was a huge black bear jump into the river and disappear across the other side. Katie was found standing on a tree that was lying on the ground and crossing the water flow. Henry retrieved his daughter and took her back to camp. Katie had a badly scratched face and hands, but was otherwise uninjured. Mrs. Flynn asked her daughter why she didn't run away when she had the chance. This is Katie's response, and I quote, "A big dog came up to me, took me in his arms and walked away with me." Mrs. Flynn realised that Katie was missing a shoe, and when questioned, Katie said that the big dog ate it. This incident was then printed on the July the 6th, 1961 in the Ludington Daily News and included some very interesting details. It stated, and I quote, "In answer to questions, the child said that after her father had left, she had played a while in the sand when a big black thing came along and played with her. Then it held out its paw and she caught hold of it and it had walked away with her. Just before dark, it had left her for a while, and when it came back, its paw was full of wintergreen berries. The bear ate some of the berries and she ate some. Then it scraped a big pile of leaves close to her and lay down close to her, and during the night had tried to cover her body with its body." Politis goes on to note a couple of interesting points. Firstly, it seems that Katie did not fully understand what had walked up to her, as she described whatever this thing was as a big black thing. Secondly, whatever this thing was brought Katie berries and fed them to her. That does not sound like something a bear would do, nor does it sound like something a wolf could do. She specifically said that she would offer the berries out of the creature's paw. Now moving on, as far as I'm aware, berries, nor berry bushes, play a role in this next incident, but similar to the previous case, the individuals involved seem to be confused as to what was actually seen. 2-year-old Roy Bilgrian lived with his mother and father in a rural area outside of McWillan, Wisconsin. On October the 21st, 1910, Roy's mother had him in the front yard playing with some toys while she went about her business doing housework. A minute or so after placing Roy in the yard, she returned to him to witness a horrifying event taking place right in front of her. She saw what she thought was a huge black bear making for the woods with her child. Helpless from fright, her hysterical cries attracted attention of a neighbour's daughter who was passing the home, who immediately gave chase to the bear. She followed the bear for 3 blocks, and on encountering a wire fence, the boy was dropped and the bear disappeared into the forest. Fortunately, the boy suffered no injury from this ordeal. Paulides went on to note that this seemed to be a very unusual incident. Bears are known to attack their prey on scene and typically do not run away with something alive in their mouths. Second to that is the fact that this was late in the year for a bear to be out in the snow. They are typically hibernating at this time. In a bizarre turn, on October the 26th, 1910, the Marshfield Times gave a different account of this incident, and I quote, "Mrs. Bilgrian, coming out of the house suddenly to look after her child, was horrified to see a large dark animal, which she thinks was a wolf, carrying her baby off to the woods." Paulides goes on to state that this is a drastic change, given that she first believed the creature to be a bear, then later described it as a wolf. It's important to note that the woman said she saw a large dark animal which she thought was a wolf. It sounds like she isn't quite sure of what she saw, but is trying to rationalize it away. Since we as humans have the need to do so, we seek answers to the things we do not understand. I imagine most would understand the difference between a bear and a wolf, especially if we had observed it over the course of 3 blocks. I don't imagine that we will ever know what attempted to take Roy, but seems to be a very strange feature of some of the cases that fit the profile that when the abductor was spotted, it couldn't be identified. I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of you that have subscribed to the channel and who share these videos, like them, and just generally show support. I appreciate it a lot and can't thank you enough. I'd also like to say thank you to my patrons for supporting me over at Patreon, so thank you to all who have signed up. If you'd like to have a look at my Patreon, you can find the link in the description. Anyway, do let me know what you thought of this one, and you'll find all of the sources and links in the description below. There's also a link to buy David's Missing 411 books, which after receiving recently, I can highly recommend. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope that you have a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
They worked at 3 or 4 different parks. They say that, yeah, they think that there's an abnormal amount of people that disappear at their parks. And on the front end, there's a lot of publicity, and on the back end, there's no publicity, and there's no follow-up. And it's almost as though nobody cares. But we think it's unusual, and we're surprised that the Park Service isn't doing something about it.
Every year, many incidents of people seeming to vanish without a trace are reported to authorities all over the world. Bizarrely, these incidents have a tendency to defy a logical conclusion and don't make a lot of sense to those investigating and searching for the missing. There's often absolutely no evidence or clues at all as to what took place to cause the disappearance. The searchers come in force and scour entire areas with sniffer dogs who act strangely and are often unable to pick up a scent. On rare occasions, the missing are found alive, but either have no memory at all or have a very strange tale to tell. Here's an example of one such incident. In 1952, a 2-year-old boy named Keith Parkins went missing from his home in Ritter, Oregon, in the middle of winter. He was playing outside in warm clothing. It had been snowing at the time, which would have made it difficult to travel very far. However, when his parents came to check on him, he was gone. A search party was put together, and along with Keith's parents, they noticed his tiny footprints in the snow and followed them to a point before they completely stopped. This was highly unusual as there were no other animal tracks, human tracks, or vehicle tracks left nearby. Keith was found 19 hours later, around 15 miles away. His coat was gone and he was lying face down in the snow on a frozen pond. When asked what happened, he couldn't remember a single thing about the disappearance. To make this incident even stranger was the fact that experts estimated that in order for Keith to have reached that location, he must have been walking constantly for the 19 hours straight, which people have had a very hard time believing given that Keith was only 2 years old. Now, former detective and author of the Missing 411 series, David Paulides, has researched many of these types of disappearances, and alongside his Can-Am missing team, who are constantly left baffled by the details they uncover for many of these cases. Obviously, many people go missing every year, but these cases seem to be different somehow. For example, the missing are often either first or last in line while hiking, and the circumstances are very unusual. No sounds are ever heard, no screams or cries for help, no thuds to indicate a fall. The people with them often note that one moment they were there and then the next they simply weren't anymore and have no idea where they went. No signs or evidence of an animal attack are found, no blood, ripped clothing or any disruption to the ground. It's almost as if these people literally seem to vanish into thin air. So, with all of that being said, let's review some of the cases where people have gone missing and have later been found only to give a very strange account of the incident, including some of the earliest cases that I'm aware of. On August the 5th, 1898, 3-year-old Alice Rachel Peck wandered from her home in an attempt to find her mother, who was not far away picking berries. Unfortunately, despite this being right outside her home and doing this on numerous occasions, Alice at some point must have gotten lost or disoriented. A massive search effort was quickly launched for the girl, and strangely enough they couldn't find a single trace of her, the sniffer dog, and the rescuers said that the girl seemed to be in what they described as a strange trance-like state initially, but would eventually come back to her senses. When questioned, Alice recalled walking barefoot along an abandoned road but wasn't sure how she got there. To make matters even stranger, between the location of the disappearance and the point at which she was found lies a series of steep drops and boulders. When asked how she overcome them, she gave a very cryptic response. She said, "The black man helped me," and claimed that he had guided and carried her over the dangerous terrain away from the location of the disappearance. Obviously, some questions remain here. Just who was this black man and how did she go missing? Right outside of her home. Where did her shoes and bonnet go? It's unlikely that we'll ever know. The following was documented in the American Ethnology Annual Report for 1898. This particular case details the incident of a 10-year-old boy known only as Wofford. During this particular day, Wofford had been out practicing archery nearby a river when he decided to stop and instead wanted to catch some fish. While he was piling up the stones in the water to make a fish trap, he reported that someone came out of the woods and told him that he looked tired and that he should take a break. This person then invited Wofford back to his home for dinner, and against better judgment, Wofford agreed. Once they arrived at the home, Wofford said that he met other friendly, welcoming people who made him feel completely at home. Strangely, Wofford also detailed that a family friend of his also showed up at the house, which made him feel more comfortable. Wofford said that he ate dinner there, played with the family's children, and was enjoying himself before falling asleep at the house. He woke up the next morning and told the family that he should leave now because his family would be worried. If this report isn't strange enough, it's about to get stranger. The same person who invited him in the first place took him outside to a path which Wofford distinctly remembered that to his left was an orchard and to the right was a cornfield. He described being taken to a junction in the path and was instructed to go along to another trail that meandered off into the wilds, as that route would take him towards the river and straight home. The boy began to walk away in the instructed direction, but said that when he turned around to wave goodbye, this person was no longer there along with the orchard and cornfield. He began to panic now, as he had no idea where he was and didn't recognise his surroundings. He said that he was surrounded by thick trees and wilderness all around him. Luckily, however, as he made his way through the forestry, he came by a group of searchers that were out looking for him, including the family friend that was present at the stranger's home. Wofford, obviously scared and confused, asked the friend where the house was and what happened to the trail. The family friend explained that he hadn't been to this house that was being described and had been searching for the boy the entire time. Interestingly, some of the superstitious locals suggested that he may have come across the shape-shifting Nunahai, or rather, the people who live anywhere, which are creatures found in Cherokee mythology. It's difficult to know what to make of this incident. As far as I'm aware, he was uninjured and completely fine, so what was the motive if he had been kidnapped? Did Wofford hallucinate or imagine everything that happened, or as the locals suggested, did he stumble into something that he shouldn't have? It's unclear, and he was adamant that he was telling the truth. Either way, something very unusual seemed to have taken place here. To make matters even stranger, children are not the only ones to come back with these strange accounts. Let's examine some similar reports by adults. Radio personality Art Bell detailed this first case. A 19-year-old woman went missing after visiting a neighbour and never returned home. A search was quickly put together and they scoured the entire neighbourhood and the nearby woods. Bizarrely, she was later found crying uncontrollably inside her own home and had a very strange tale to tell. She later claimed that at the time of her disappearance, she felt her body jerk involuntarily and began to walk in the opposite direction as intended, almost as if she felt compelled to do so. During her time spent missing, she went on to claim that it was like there was a barrier preventing her from going anywhere she wanted to go, instead being pushed further away. As the sun began to set and things got darker, she said that she could see some of the search party members and tried to call out for them, but no matter what she did, they never looked her way. She went on to say that finally this barrier lifted and she ran home absolutely terrified. Here's another that occurred more recently. On September the 22nd, 2012, 53-year-old Linda Ortega went on a hike with her 56-year-old brother Eddie Huff in the forest of the Arkansas Ozarks, which is located near the town of St. Joe. Now, this is where things get strange. Eddie was absolutely adamant that he had seen Linda enter one of their relatives' home and that she was safe. However, she was absolutely nowhere to be found. This would commence a large search effort to find the missing woman. Fortunately, she was found the same day in the woods and the searchers detailed that she was in a state of distress. After being questioned about what had happened, Linda had absolutely no idea how she had been separated from her brother. She had no memory of going missing at all. She mentioned that she thought that Eddie had been hurt somehow and she tried to find help. As she continued walking, she said that she came across other hikers, but all attempts at communication failed and the passers-by simply ignored her, almost as if they couldn't see or hear her. I found this next part chilling. She recalled other people being in the woods with her. She said that the shadowy figures were hiding in the bushes and that they were very weird people. She said that noticing these people made her begin to pick up the pace and walk faster. Obviously, she didn't feel safe. The nature and circumstances of her disappearance were very strange. What do you think? Now, I've covered this one before, so I'll only go over this one briefly as it fits the criteria. Stephen Kubacki went missing sometime in February 1978 in the state of Michigan. Stephen's skis and ski poles were found abandoned in the snow. Authorities ominously detailed that his tracks just seemed to have suddenly stopped, which left everyone involved baffled. It was almost as if Stephen just walked straight out of reality. No one could explain the fact that there were no tracks. His backpack was also found nearby, and since his belongings were found close to the river, it was assumed that he must have fallen in and drowned. Of course, this was followed by a large search effort which unfortunately turned up nothing. Everyone thought that Stephen must have passed away. Now, this is where things get bizarre. 15 months later, his father received a knock at the door and upon answering realised it was Stephen. When questioned about what had happened and where he had been, Stephen's account made even less sense than the initial disappearance. He stated that he woke up in a meadow roughly 14 miles from his father's house and was wearing clothes that were not his, along with a small satchel containing maps which were also not his. Apart from this, he had absolutely no knowledge at all as to where he went or what had happened to him over the previous 15 months he spent missing, and was shocked to hear that any time had passed at all. Ever since this incident occurred, Stephen has been unwilling to speak about this traumatic event. Now, to my knowledge, I'm not sure if Paulides has spoken about this next incident and phenomenon, but author Steph Young has, and the following has been paraphrased from her book, A Terror in the Woods, which will be linked in the description below. In early January 2002, 14-year-old Daniel Nolan had gone night fishing with his friends and promised his mother that he would be back home during the early hours of the following morning. The place they chose to fish was off the Hamble waterfront, located near Southampton in the UK. Despite being 14, Daniel was considered to be quite experienced when it came to fishing and was one of his major hobbies alongside swimming, and he was also a member of the Sea Scouts. His mother, sat at home panicking now, grew nervous when Daniel didn't return as promised. She went to retrieve her son as she knew the location where the boys had been fishing that night. Upon arrival, Daniel was nowhere to be seen, but she did find his seemingly abandoned fishing equipment. Obviously, she called the police, and this would be the start of another large-scale search effort like many of the cases. Specialist sniffer dogs would join the search but could not pick up the boy's scent at all, which made the search teams come to the conclusion that Daniel must have drowned. 5 teams of police divers and 2 army sonar units were brought in to join the search, but left everyone baffled when they couldn't find any trace of Daniel either. Daniel's friends were questioned, and they detailed that they had all decided to finish up early, including Daniel, and as a group went to hang out near some of the local shops. After deciding that they were finished for the night, Daniel went back to the waterfront to retrieve his fishing gear, but was obviously never seen again. A lady that didn't wish to be named was walking her dog one morning by a scenic location named Chapman's Pool, which is in Dorset. It's important to note that this is in a different county to the disappearance and over 40 miles away. What she found there shocked her. She saw a human foot still inside her shoe, washed up on a beach. Bizarrely, after DNA analysis, it was found that this foot belonged to Daniel Nolan. Tidal experts were brought in to try and explain just how this foot, still inside the sock and trainer, managed to travel 40 miles in the sea to the location. These experts determined that his foot must have come away from the rest of his body as a result of natural processes, but obviously this didn't convince everyone, which caused a lot of speculation. The authorities determined that the boy must have fallen in while night fishing and had therefore been swept out to sea. Daniel's mother, however, didn't find the explanation acceptable and stated that this raises more questions than it answers. We must emphasise this does not tell us the circumstances of his disappearance. This disappearance and the finding of the foot a year later sparked a lot of discussion about this incident, which was frequently described as a truly bizarre case. Many people simply did not believe that the experienced diver team and sonar team could not find the boy if he had simply fallen into the water, speculating that he would not have been swept so far. It was also noted that anyone else that has fallen into the water in recent years has always been able to be found. To make matters even more bizarre, this is not the first instance of a foot washing up on a beach. In 2016, the Guardian newspaper posed the question, why are more and more feet washing ashore in British Columbia, which is located in Canada? Since 2007, 12 human feet inside running shoes have been found on the shores of British Columbia. It had been almost 4 years since the last one of these sightings, but in 1,000,000 to 1 odds, but to find 2 feet is crazy, come on. David's Missing 411 books and Steph Young's book. As always, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and if you did, remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already, it helps me a lot. I hope that you have a great day, or evening depending on where you are. Be safe guys, and I'll catch you soon. Peace.
here in St. Louis, and we will get back to you.
Nobody has any theories on that.
The argument suggesting that ancient aliens created the human race has been around for quite some time now and has fascinated authors and researchers for decades. With strange sculptures being found such as this one, which some say that the thing on the man's wrist resembles a watch, it's easy to see how this idea has spread far and wide across the world. And while mainstream scientists think this entire story is absurd, many pieces of evidence have come to light across the globe which may back up the ancient alien theory. According to some, the connection between the rise of civilization and alien beings can be found in history, tucked away in the ancient manuscripts and clay tablets that have survived for thousands of years. A good example of this is the ancient Sumerian king list, which documented the kings who ruled over the earth for over 241,000 years since the original kingship had descended from the heavens. Many people have made the argument that when our ancestors used phrases such as descending from the heavens or the gods came down in fiery chariots, they were being symbolic and weren't just making this stuff up, but were actively documenting the things they were seeing without understanding any of the technology behind it. Anyway, mainstream scholars don't believe everything written in the ancient Sumerian king list to be true. They state that the list is a mixture of prehistorical and mythological accounts which speaks of gods that ruled over the land enjoying implausibly lengthy reigns. Of course, implausibly lengthy reigns assumes that we are speaking about humans ruling the earth, but what if that wasn't the case? And, while the ancient texts might be extraordinary, the artifacts that have since been discovered across the globe are even more so. Many depict beings eerily similar to modern-day astronauts. Al Warden, former astronaut and member of the Apollo 15 mission, said something fascinating about alien life in an interview with Good Morning Britain. When asked, "Do you think there are extraterrestrials out there?" Al replies, and I'm kind of paraphrasing here because there's a bit of back and forth, but he essentially says, "Yeah, we are the aliens, but we just think that they are somebody else. We are the ones that came from somewhere else because somebody else had to survive from elsewhere and they came in a spacecraft and landed here and then started civilization." He goes on to say that if you don't believe, read some books on the ancient Sumerians and see what they had to say. Now, could that have been the case? Sure. But one of the problems with that theory, of course, is the fact that our DNA differs roughly 1.5% to the chimp, meaning that we're incredibly similar and overwhelmingly the evidence suggests that we evolved here. But arguments are out there that suggest while we did evolve here, it wasn't completely natural and that extraterrestrial life may have given us a helping hand and tampered with our genetics, essentially creating modern man. Now of course, it's not like I can just go around endorsing theories because at the end of the day, it's always best to have undeniable evidence. Although, some say we already have that, and they point towards all of the megalithic structures created in ancient times before we even had the freaking wheel, such as the pyramids and etc. And it does kind of make sense to me that our ancestors were trying to describe the things that they were seeing symbolically, instead of just creating a story to mess with future generations. But anyway, I'm going to end this one here guys, stay safe and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching and remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Peace. Hundreds, if not thousands of UFOs are reported every year. While some are explained, many of them go without an explanation, and this incident was no different. Even being described as one of the most interesting cases from Project Blue Book, the Air Force has now declassified investigations into UFOs. On a hot, dark night in August 1952, Scoutmaster Sonny DeVerges, 30, was driving a group of Boy Scouts home after a trip when he saw a bright flash over a military trail near West Palm Beach, Florida. Thinking that someone might be in trouble and that either a plane had crashed or there had been a car accident, DeVerges pulled onto the hard shoulder of the highway to have a closer look. He then got out of the car and took his knife, along with a flashlight, and entered the Palmetto Grove near the location of the lights, leaving the 3 Boy Scouts in the car with instruction to alert the residents of a nearby farmhouse if he wasn't back in 15 minutes. The now declassified documents state that Sonny had been gone for around 4 minutes, hacking and slashing his way through the bushes before entering a clearing in the grove. He then described an acute, nauseating smell and the sense of somebody watching him. As he stood still, assessing his situation, he next experiences a sensation of oven-like heat coming from directly above him. Sonny then looked up, and in the report stated that he could not see any stars as he was standing beneath a hovering object. Sonny recounted that the object was circular, no seams, dull black, and was around 30 feet in diameter with a height of 10 feet. A convex dome on the top, and the bottom edge lit with a bright glow. This is where his account differs from most other reports. As he backed away from the scene, he heard a sound that he described as being like metal on metal, like a hatch opening. At this point, a red flare-like light began to move towards him. He placed his hands over his face to protect his eyes, but as the ball of light grew nearer, it turned into a red mist and engulfed him. It was at this point in which he lost consciousness. After he woke, he said that he was leaning on a tree but couldn't see very well as his eyes burned. Rummaging his way back out of the palmettos, he found his way back to the highway and was met by the boys and local authorities. Sonny had been gone for about an hour. The police said that they had never seen anyone as terrified as he was in that moment. The boys said that they had seen what they described as a semicircle of white light descending into the trees. They also saw a red light briefly through the trees and Sonny's flashlight going dark. That's the point they ran to the farmhouse for help. Back at the sheriff's office now, Sonny and the boys were questioned. The officers noted that the hair on Sonny's forearms were singed and the skin was burned. They also noted 3 tiny burn holes in the bill of the Scoutmaster's cap. At this point, the police contacted the relevant authorities and the case eventually made its way into Project Blue Book. This is where things got even more weird. Initially thinking that Sonny and the boys had just conjured up this story, investigators went to the exact clearing where Sonny said this took place, and there they took soil samples. The evidence taken there would prove to be the most inexplicable piece of the encounter. While tests were being carried out, Sonny was deemed a liar and an opportunist by the locals and the media. The boys were also accused of lying. However, after the soil samples came back, what they found was astonishing. Though the soil remained consistent, the root structure of the plants in question were charred black and the lower leaves had deteriorated as if by heat. The only way the lab could come close to duplicating the effect was to place live clumps of grass in a pan of sandy soil and heat it to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. It was at this point that the case was essentially closed and still today remains unexplained. Sonny's encounter still remains one of the most mysterious and convincing cases of an encounter with something completely unknown. Anyway, I'm going to end this one here. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this case. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Stay safe guys, and I'll catch you later. Peace. Humanity's inception as intelligent beings is as a result of extraterrestrial genetic manipulation on a less advanced mankind during our ancient past. Understandably, this theory may sound far-fetched, but researchers such as Zacharias Sitchin believe that humanity had been genetically engineered to work as slaves in our ancient past. Female serial killers are relatively rarer than their male counterparts. However, there are still a number of women who have made history. Thanks to the hit movie starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, pretty much everyone has heard of the Men in Black. In the movie, their job is to protect Earth from the scum of the universe. In reality, however, the truth may be much harder to accept. Theories range from the Men in Black being intelligence operatives to extraterrestrials in disguise, trying to keep a secret from humanity. From the 1950s onwards, the Men in Black figured prominently in ufology. They are said to show up when ordinary citizens have an extraordinary sighting or encounter with UFOs or the beings within. Their primary concern seems to be intimidating individuals into staying quiet about the things they have seen. To make matters even more mysterious, some law enforcement officers and military personnel claim to have been subject to their intimidation. There have been hundreds, if not thousands of reports about these Men in Black. In this video, we'll be looking at various theories and mysteries in regards to who or what these beings are and what their purpose might be. Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a 58-year-old doctor, was actively investigating an alleged UFO abduction case. One evening during the summer, he found himself home alone as his wife and children had gone out. Little did Hopkins know that this night would be like no other. As Hopkins was working, the telephone rang and a stranger spoke to him, asking if he could come by and talk to Hopkins about the abduction case. Hopkins found this strange, as the case had not been publicised at all, but he agreed anyway, hung up the phone and walked to the door to turn on the porch light so that the caller could see the steps when he arrived. To Hopkins' surprise, there was already a man walking up the stairs of the porch. He was shocked when the man introduced himself as the caller, as there were no mobile phones in 1976. Upon reflection, Hopkins did say, "At the time, letting him in seemed the natural thing to do, but I saw no car, and even if he did have a car, he could not possibly have gotten to my house that quickly from any phone." The stranger was dressed in a white shirt with white gloves, but his trousers, jacket, tie, shoes and hat were all black. His body didn't appear to fill out his sleeves or trousers, and the crease on his pants remained razor sharp even at the knees when he sat down. As he removed his hat, it became apparent that he didn't have hair nor eyebrows. His small nose and ears were set low, his chin receded, and his face was extremely pale, except for his ears were set low. He didn't have hair nor eyebrows. His small nose and ears were set low, his chin nor eyebrows. His small nose and ears were set low, his chin receded, and his face was extremely pale, except for a vivid red gash of a mouth. During their conversation, he brushed his lips with his glove, and the doctor noted that a red smudge appeared on his glove, and that he must have been wearing lipstick. Also interesting to note is that upon arrival of this man, Hopkins' dog began behaving strangely and seemed to be very afraid of the stranger, even hiding in a closet. After being satisfied with the information he'd gathered from Hopkins, he began behaving strangely and changed the topic. He asked Hopkins to take out the 2 coins that were in his pocket. This shocked Hopkins, as he had no idea how the man could have known the contents of his pockets, but he did, and then the man told Hopkins to watch the coins in his hand. The 2 coins then vanished into thin air, and the man spoke. "Neither you, nor anyone else on this planet will ever see those coins again." The man then stated that his energy was running low and proceeded to leave. In 1967, the United States Air Force expressed concern about the Men in Black and wanted to find out more about these people who were going around scaring people and claiming that they were from the US Armed Services. Here's a statement from the spokesman for Project Blue Book at the Pentagon, Colonel George P. Freeman. "Mysterious men dressed in Air Force uniforms or all in black and bearing impressive credentials from government agencies have been silencing UFO witnesses. We have checked a number of these cases, and these men are not connected to the Air Force in any way. We haven't been able to find anything out about these men. By posing as Air Force officers and government agents, they are committing a federal offence. We would sure like to catch one. Unfortunately, the trail is always too cold by the time we hear about these cases, but we are still trying. Colonel Freeman was not the only one to voice his concern on the issue. The Assistant Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, Lieutenant General Hewitt Wheelers, sent a memo on March 1st, 1967 to various agencies in the Department of Defense. This is what it said. Information, not verifiable, has reached headquarters that persons claiming to represent the Air Force or other defense establishments have contacted citizens who have sighted unidentified flying objects. In one reported case, an individual in civilian clothes who presented himself as a member of NORAD demanded and received photos belonging to a private citizen. In another, a person in an Air Force uniform approached local police and other citizens who had sighted a UFO, assembled them in a schoolroom and told them that they did not see what they thought they saw and that they should not talk to anyone about the sighting. All military and civilian personnel, and particularly information officers and UFO investigating officers who hear of such reports, should immediately notify their local OSI offices. This obviously scared a lot of people and left people wondering just who or what the men in black are. Despite the military stating that they don't know what is going on, they still could be implicated. Some abductees and people who have either had a significant UFO encounter or have been visited by the men in black often report that they have been followed by black helicopters. Theories range from these aircraft being owned by the government to them being alien aircraft in disguise. A contactee known as Kim Carlsberg recorded being followed by numerous black helicopters on the days after going through a nighttime abduction experience. Unconfirmed sources report that these black helicopters belong to the US Army 160th SAW Division. They are believed to be stealth aircraft which cannot be detected by radar, just like stealth bombers. These craft may also be available to other government agencies including the CIA, FEMA and the NSA. Based on this information, it could be that the men in black work under the military to silence those who know more than they should. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, also known as FEMA, is the organisation in the US you hear from on the local news whenever there has been some sort of disaster such as hurricanes or earthquakes. FEMA manage the funds given out by the government to states that have been affected by such events to help them recover. It has been reported that when looking into covert or black operations, FEMA come up again and again, and that FEMA are used as a cover to direct funds into these operations. There is no solid evidence to suggest that FEMA are involved with the men in black, but according to the author Harold E. Burt, FEMA turns up again and again from all kinds of different sources whenever government secrecy and funding is the topic. No other civilian agency does, not the FDA, FAA or USDA. Not only that, but after any major disaster, people seem to have a hard time getting relief from this agency as if there were not enough funds. We should have a budget review done of FEMA funds to find out the truth. Potentially the most interesting theory, and to complicate matters even further, is the idea that the men in black are actually humanoid extraterrestrials in disguise. This was claimed as a result of their cold, sinister, unnatural appearance and behaviour. What do you think of the men in black? Do they exist? I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember to like it and subscribe to the channel. I hope that you have a great day, or evening, depending on where you are. The prehistoric monument of Stonehenge is believed to have been built between 3000 BC and 2000 BC, consisting of a ring of standing stones located in Wiltshire, England. It is a popular tourist attraction, with over 1.38 million visitors in 2016 alone. Many archaeologists and researchers still question the actual purpose and use of the stones, and why the ancient people of England built the structure in the first place. Over the years, a lot of different theories have circled history books and the internet, with theories ranging from a place of worship to the stones being a construction of alien intelligence. Some theories also suggest that Stonehenge was built merely as a team-building exercise, or it is a creation of two bored cavemen. However, the true reason as to why Stonehenge was built still remains a mystery today. With archaeologists still looking for an answer, here are 5 theories as to a possible explanation. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Number 5. It is said that Stonehenge was used by the elite and people of importance for worship and burial. This is because the alignment and opening of the stones facing the midsummer solstice sunrise suggests that the area was created and used for ritualistic sun worship. The stones may have also been used for healing, as there have been discoveries of ancient human remains around the area which all show signs of some type of illness or injury. The discovery of these remains also uncovered fragments of bluestone, the first original type of stone used to build the site, which may have been used by the ancients as talismans to ward off negative energies and to protect against illness. Due to the unearthing of human remains, it is suggesting that Stonehenge may also have been used for burial purposes, specifically for the religious or political elite, as archaeologists also found objects that may have been used to burn incense. Number 4. It is possible that Stonehenge was built for seasonal and agricultural purposes and allowed the ancients to predict celestial events such as solstices and eclipses. This theory is proposed as the structure and alignment of the stones face directly towards both the summer and winter solstice sunrises, providing the equivalent of a modern-day observatory. Some researchers agree with this theory, as it would have allowed better and more efficient knowledge of agriculture and religious events due to them being able to keep track of the seasonal changes. Some archaeological evidence suggests that pigs were slaughtered at Stonehenge during December and January, suggesting that the ancients took part in celebrations and rituals at the stones during the winter solstice. How they managed to align it so perfectly still baffles researchers today. Number 3. An interesting theory is that Stonehenge was originally built to be used as a musical instrument or a type of bell. This idea was proposed after it was found that the bluestones used in the structure reverberated when struck with a quartz hammer. Interestingly, the stones produced different pitches and each had their own tone, suggesting that the stones were placed strategically in order to produce specific sounds. The sounds the stones made are said to be extremely similar to that of church bells, and so pose the question, was Stonehenge created specifically for ritualistic and religious purposes? Or could it have been created as a mode of communication, as it is said that the sounds created by the stones can be heard from miles away? This theory seems to hold a lot of weight within the archaeological community, as the bluestones, also known as lithophones due to the production of sounds when struck, were often used in Welsh church bells in the 1700s. There has also been evidence of the stones being struck due to marks within the structures, strengthening the theory that the ancients had used the stones as some type of instrument. Number 2. This next theory suggests that Merlin, the wizard of Arthurian legend, created Stonehenge by using magic to transport the stones from Mount Kilaris, Ireland. This myth was a popular belief in the 14th century. It was believed that Merlin was ordered to magically build Stonehenge from King Aurelius Ambrosius in 450 AD, after there was a bloody war on Salisbury Plain between the British and the Saxons. Once the war was over, Ambrosius wanted a monument built to remember the dead British soldiers, and Merlin suggested bringing Ireland's giant ringstone circle over to Britain. As the structure was a magnificent sight, King Ambrosius agreed and ordered Merlin to move it. The attempts made by the British soldiers to move the stones failed, and soon after, Merlin decided to dismantle the stones with his magic and carry it back to Britain, to honour the British soldiers that had lost their lives. Number 1. Potentially, one of the most interesting theories about the construction of Stonehenge is that of alien technology. This theory was proposed by the Swedish author Erik von Daniken, who suggested that Stonehenge is a model of our solar system, which also functions as an alien landing pad. It is known that the stones used in the structure are extremely heavy, some weighing approximately 50 tons, and so it is questioned as to how the stones would have been moved from as far away as Wales, where the bluestones originate, if not for interference of an alien race. Theorists have also stated how meticulously the stones are aligned, due to the fact that they line up perfectly with solstices and eclipses, showing a potential fascination of the sky. But was this fascination merely the British people showing their faith, or was it actually something mysterious from the sky, creating specific landmarks around the world, including the Egyptian pyramids and the mysterious Easter Island heads? So there were 5 theories on the possible explanations for Stonehenge. What do you think about these theories? If you enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel with notifications on. It helps me a lot. If you're interested in reading more about the theories of Stonehenge, please visit the description. The sources are linked down there. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day or evening, depending on where you are. In December of 2017, news outlets across the world began to report on footage released by the Pentagon. US fighter jets were scrambled to investigate reports of an unidentified flying object off the coast of San Diego and recorded this footage. Let's have a look.
Dude, there's a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating.
Towards the end of 2017, the Pentagon confirmed the existence of a $22 million government project called the Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, which investigated sightings of UFOs between 2007 and 2012. This admission excited UFO theorists around the world, as it was the first time the United States government has admitted to investigating UFOs since 1969. The project was made public by Luis Elizondo, who told the New York Times he ran the shadowy Department of Defense program from 2007 to 2012, and continued to look into the issue until he resigned in October 2017. Some theorists have made the point that the government wouldn't just waste $22 million on something it didn't think posed a security threat. So, it just makes you think, what else do they know? Here are 5 mysterious videos of UFO sightings. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. This first video was taken by a man named Matt Boland. Matt was smoking outside after working all day on January the 1st, 2018. Whilst mesmerised by the sight of the full moon, he decided to snap some photos of it, but quickly noticed something that astonished him and began recording. The video seems to show a massive unidentified flying object either coming out of the moon or leaving the moon's surface before vanishing. Matt states that this was not the first time he has seen such objects near the moon, and has seen similar phenomena several times before, which he thinks may be the same object. This next video was recorded on January the 1st, 2017, and shows what appears to be a bright, unidentified flying object hovering over Goodyear in Arizona. A witness who wished to remain anonymous reported, "My daughter and I were driving at night in the dark when we noticed 4 lights that looked very bright above the distant mountains. 4 of them lined up next to one another from right to left. They stayed stationary for a few moments, and then one would fly swiftly away from the others, leaving 3 in a linear horizontal line before it disappeared. It would spontaneously reappear and then fly above the other 3, move left again, and then realign with the other 4, leaving 4 brightly shining in the sky. We also saw a distant aeroplane, but it appeared to be farther away, higher, and with blinking lights. The UFOs we saw were solid bright white and yellow. They were brilliant against the night sky. They flew fluidly, and would move great lengths across the sky in an instant, disappearing and reappearing. They were much larger than the stars in the sky, and brighter than the brightest star. We felt excited and in awe, and happy they would reappear so we could get good pictures and videos. Our neighbours also saw them while out driving. We finally left to go home. We have seen them before in a dark night sky over Estrella Mountains to the east. They are common in this part of Goodyear. We see them several times a year. This video sent many UFO enthusiasts into a frenzy. It was shot sometime in October 2017 and seems to show an unidentified flying object manipulating the clouds in the sky. The object seems to hover for a short while in the clouds, before dispersing it moments later. Let's have a look. Another commenter claimed to have seen a similar UFO in the past erase a cloud, but didn't disclose a location. However, there is not total agreement on the legitimacy of the video. Some have expressed skepticism, and others have stated that it is a great fakery. Interestingly, a similar object was reported by an Australian woman named Jenny Morrison not long after, above the Great Barrier Reef, displaying similar features. This video emerged from Russia in February 2016. The footage appears to show some sort of craft or object following the International Space Station as it orbited the Earth. Allegedly, this video was shot on the cameras of the space station while it waited for a delivery. Let's have a look. Many claim that it is a UFO, but others remain skeptical about the video's authenticity. Some commentators remark that the video provided does not possess the same quality as the footage from the cameras on the space station. Other suggestions rely on the object's rotation and motion, stating that it does not look like an object in orbit, and could be a Russian Soyuz spacecraft transporting cosmonauts into space. Obviously, this video has been hotly debated, but no consensus has been found. What do you think? Many UFO researchers say that this sighting from New Zealand in October 2016 is among the best evidence of extraterrestrial visitation to Earth. Not only did footage surface of this mysterious craft from a weather monitoring feed, but it also appeared on radar and could be seen entering New Zealand from the sea. Let's have a look. This craft was allegedly moving at 120 times the speed of typical commercial aeroplanes, and indeed much faster than any known military aircraft. At the time of this sighting, the craft was given an ID name of ZED-KG-DG on the public radar. Later, however, one ufologist and blogger attempted to find this ID on the records but reported that it had been removed. He suspected that this is an instance where the government deliberately hid proof of this event. There were 5 mysterious UFO sightings. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, remember to like the video, subscribe and hit the little bell icon to be notified of future videos. It helps me a lot. I hope you all have a great day, or evening, depending on where you are. You may have heard of the Flat Earth conspiracy theory, but did you know that another theory exists about our home planet? There are those today who claim the Earth to be hollow. Before we get into the top 5 claims of this theory, some background information is needed. The man who began the Hollow Earth movement was known as Edmund Halley. During the 17th century, he proposed that the Earth was hollow and the outermost crust, where we live, is around 500 miles thick. He claimed that this is the explanation as to why anomalous compass readings occur around the poles. He goes on to suggest that beneath the surface exist further shell layers, each containing their own atmosphere capable of supporting life. He envisaged the atmosphere inside as luminous, and that the escaping gas is the actual cause of the aurora borealis. Halley's strange idea was further expanded upon over the next few centuries, reshaping the theory to state that instead of having many shell layers, the entire interior of our planet is just one gigantic cavern with a small sun that hangs in the centre, creating a lush, livable environment inside the Earth. According to some Hollow Earth theorists, this theory was further developed by famous mathematicians and scientists such as Leonhard Euler in the 18th century and John Leslie in the 19th century. However, the sources for these accreditations seem to be somewhat unreliable. Here are 5 claims made about the Hollow Earth. At the start of the 1800s, a soldier and scholar named John Cleves Sims proposed that there were several entrances to the Hollow Earth. Sims was quoted as saying, "I declare that the Earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles 12 or 16 degrees. I pledge my life in support of this truth, and I am ready to explore the hollow, if the world will support and aid me in the undertaking." Today, Hollow Earth theorists maintain that entrances do exist at the poles, even claiming that early satellite images show a giant hole at the North Pole. They also theorise that governments of the world won't allow civilians to explore the South Pole or commercial aeroplanes to fly over it, as they fear the entrance and other anomalies will be discovered. According to many who believe the Earth is hollow, a solid Earth is too heavy to orbit around the Sun. In 1905, a scientist named George Ibsen gave a lecture on alternative theories about the Earth. He stated that the only way the Earth could maintain its position in ethereal space is if it's hollow. Ibsen also believed that entrances to the inside can be found at the poles. Unfortunately, this is the only piece of information I can find about this claim. 3. Because globes are hollow. Despite scientists around the world snubbing the Hollow Earth theory, some religious people were wrapping their beliefs around the possibility of a hollow Earth. In an article from 1893, a religious commentator openly stated that God does nothing in vain, and that it would not make sense for the deity to create an Earth as a solid ball, suggesting it would be a waste. To emphasise his point, the commentator went on to add, "Would not the animals on the Earth be more solid at their centre than their circumference, instead of being strongly ribbed near the surface, so as to support the greatest pressure, leaving a cavity in the centre capable of active operation?" The commentator is essentially saying that the Earth is hollow like the life forms of the planet. He later destroyed his own religious theory, however, by adding, "Do not our globe makers understand that a hollow globe is preferred to a solid? If not, why do they make them hollow?" Among believers, the thought of a lush tropical paradise that likely houses an advanced race of aliens within the Earth is common. Hollow Earth theorists suggest that UFOs witnessed in our skies do not originate from outer space, but instead come from the inner Earth itself. The Hollow Earth is said to produce animals and people that are larger and much healthier than those on the surface due to the perfect conditions found inside. Trees grow up to 1,000 feet tall, and the humanoids can grow up to 15 feet tall. According to Hollow Earth theorists, contact has already been made with the civilization within, but an international banking conspiracy has worked to cover up the existence of an inner Earth and its entrances. The most popular piece of evidence in support of the Hollow Earth is a secret journal entry by Admiral Richard Byrd. He claimed to have flown over the North and South Pole and saw the entrances for himself, among flying saucers. This journal entry also spoke of Byrd flying into the entrance and making contact with the race that lives inside. There are reports that Adolf Hitler and other post-World War II Germans believed in the Hollow Earth doctrine. During the war, Hitler was said to have been fascinated by the South Pole and reportedly sent many expeditions there to uncover lost alien technology. It has been speculated that Hitler escaped to the South Pole towards the end of World War II when he realised his days were numbered. Hollow Earth theorists claim that Hitler and other Nazi officials either resided in a Nazi base located in the South Pole, or they descended into the entrance of the Hollow Earth, where they lived out the rest of their lives. The story goes that in 1938, the Nazis sent a ship called the Schwabenland to Antarctica to establish a permanent base deep within the interior of the continent. Nazi surveyors discovered a vast network of underground tunnels, including a warm geothermal lake, and some say alien technology was found there. The Nazis reportedly used resources to construct a large underground city called New Berlin, or Base 211. The British discovered the Nazi base and in 1943 mounted an attack named Operation Tabarin and tried to establish a military foothold in the area. However, the British were outmanned and the Nazis were deeply entrenched and well supplied. Eventually, the Nazis went on the offensive and besieged the British outposts, even through the end of the war in May 1945. Shortly thereafter, British SAS troops reinforced the failing outposts and rescued Operation Tabarin survivors before mounting their own assault against New Berlin. This assault was a dismal failure, however, and the British withdrew and deemed the Nazi Antarctic fortress as impregnable. The war machine of the United States, weary from World War II, powered itself back up to take on this new threat. In 1946, the US sent 4,700 soldiers with a fleet of 13 ships, including an aircraft carrier. This was known as Operation High Jump. Their aircraft were able to penetrate deep into the continent and engage the Nazis. This conflict only lasted a few months, and for the next 11 years, the Nazi fortress remained uncontested. But then, in 1958, the skies above New Berlin lit up with the fire of nuclear hell. The US had detonated 3 W-25 warheads on the Nazi base, destroying it completely. Hollow Earth theorists claim that Hitler could have escaped and found a way into the entrance of the Hollow Earth. There were 5 claims made about the Hollow Earth. What do you think? If you would like more information about the Hollow Earth and the things discussed in this video, visit the description. The sources are linked down there. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you have a great day, or evening, depending on where you are. The Lost Colony of Roanoke is one of America's oldest unsolved mysteries, which can be traced back to August 1587. A group of around 115 English settlers arrived on Roanoke Island. Later that year, John White, the governor of the new colony, left his wife and daughter to sail back to England with the intention of bringing back supplies. Unfortunately for John, just as he arrived, England and Spain had gone to war, and Queen Elizabeth had called on every available ship to confront the mighty Spanish Armada. 3 years later, in August 1590, John was able to return to Roanoke. Upon arrival, the colony had seemingly disappeared without a trace. The only clue as to what might have happened was a single word, Croatoan, carved into a wooden post left by the colony. The fate of the lost colony remains unknown. Investigations have continued over the centuries, but no one has provided a definitive answer. Here are 5 theories as to what may have happened to the lost colony. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. The obvious answer might be that the Native Americans from the Croatoan Island, just south of Roanoke, invaded and murdered the colony. However, no evidence has ever been found of this theory. No signs of a struggle or an attack, and no mass gravesite has ever been found. It could be possible that the colony was absorbed into the native tribes of the area due to the fact that supplies were running low and the colony could have been facing starvation with lack of food. Or perhaps instead of being absorbed, the colony could have been enslaved or executed on suspicion of witchcraft. However, the local tribes in the area did not regularly execute witches. There was precedence of them putting dangerous outsiders to death, which the colonists were. Evidence would have been expected to surface though if this was the case, such as burial sites, which haven't to date. It seems logical to think that if the colony were facing starvation as a result of lack of supplies, that they would try to make their own way back home to England, especially since the governor, John White, never returned. It is possible that on their voyage back to England, they met their bloody end at the hands of the Spanish Armada, sinking them somewhere between the North Atlantic Ocean and the North Sea. Unfortunately, no shipwreck or evidence of any kind has been found to support this theory. If they didn't try to make their way back to England, the colonists could still have been murdered by Spanish troops, since they were present in Florida at the time, and since England and Spain were locked in war over their rivalry over the colonization of America, among other things. Could it be that Spanish troops made their way to the colony to destroy an English foothold in the area? Number 3. Sabotage. It has been theorised that Queen Elizabeth's Secretary of State, Sir Francis Walsingham, wanted to bring down Sir Walter Raleigh, also known as the Queen's Golden Boy. Walsingham was said to have been very jealous of Raleigh and the way the Queen gave him preferential treatment. Raleigh was given a royal patent to all the land he could settle in the New World, angering Walsingham. Anthropologist Lee Miller believes that the colonists were the victim of a plot by Walsingham. She believes this because 2 years prior to the settlers arriving at Roanoke Island, 15 troops were left in 1585 to hold the island so it wouldn't fall into the hands of the Spanish. They were supposed to set sail 100 miles up the Chesapeake Bay to establish the colony on the mainland instead. This didn't happen, however. After disembarking on Roanoke, the captain announced that this would be where they would be staying and refused to take them to the mainland, stating that he wouldn't land the planters in any other place. The colony was essentially being placed in a position that White knew would have difficulties in sustaining a colony of over 100 people, a position where English resupply ships would not look for them, and to their horror, when they eventually settled 2 years later, they found the garrison razed and abandoned, where the bones of one soldier was present and no trace of the other 14. In John White's opinion, this wasn't an accident. He wrote a letter expressing his view that the colony had been sabotaged, but it still remains a mystery. This theory is a bit darker and more gruesome than those featured so far. That is, the colony may either have been victims of cannibalism or practiced it themselves. There were more aggressive tribes in the area who may have been cannibals and planned for the colony of Roanoke to be their next meal. It's taken a long time, but with John being gone for 3 years, there is no way of knowing when the settlers started to disappear. They could have gone missing one by one, or been subject to a larger scale attack. If they weren't victims of an attack, it is possible that the colony of Roanoke succumbed to cannibalism themselves. Their governor left for supplies, led to them eating themselves out of existence. An ancient Native American legend states that when a human resorts to cannibalism to survive, they are transformed into a wild, furious beast, the Wendigo. Perhaps they still exist today. Number 1. A reptilian devil of the woods possessed the colonists. This final theory may seem far-fetched and like a thing of nightmares, but throughout history, humans have spoken of reptilian or serpent-like entities all over the world, often worshipping them as gods, such as those in ancient Egypt. The Croatoans reported strange phenomena such as birds falling from the skies, and large numbers of wildlife dying abruptly in the area where the native people hunted. This was around the same time the colony vanished. They told of an evil spirit in reptile form, which would attach itself to humans and possess them, causing the victims to demonstrate demonic traits such as violence and greed. It is believed that the Croatoans warned the colonists of this evil, and that it had infested the entire region. Once the infighting began, the settlers knew they were infected with the creature's evil, turning on one another, and chaos ensued, leading to the death of the colony. This seemed like a fitting theory for number 1, as there is a bonus piece of information I'd like to share. If you remember, the word Croatoan was carved into a wooden post left by the colony. This isn't the first time this word has appeared after a mysterious disappearance. The well-known stagecoach robber Black Bart carved the word into one of the walls of his prison cell right before being released in 1888, before vanishing, never to be seen again. Ambrose Bierce, a famous horror author, vanished in Mexico in 1913. The word Croatoan was found carved into one of his bedposts. The word then appeared again in 1921 when it was discovered, written on the final page of a logbook found on the notorious ghost ship known as Carol A. Deering, after it ran aground on Cape Hatteras, missing its crew, nearby the island of Croatoan. This mysterious word would appear once more, to my knowledge, found in the journal of a woman named Amelia Earhart after she disappeared in 1937. There were 5 theories on what may have happened to the missing colony of Roanoke. What do you think about these theories? If you're interested in reading more about the lost colony, please visit the description. The sources are linked down there. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great day, or evening, depending on where you are. When someone goes missing, people will frantically search for them, including the media, with some cases staying in the public eye and mainstream TV for years. But what about the cases that aren't broadcasted? Some of the cases that go unnoticed by the public, with only a few mentions in the local newspaper, seem to have a mysterious atmosphere surrounding them, with strange and unusual circumstances. Here are 5 strange unsolved cases where people have gone missing. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the video. Cleashindra Hall, 18 years old, was just 2 weeks away from finishing high school and had been accepted to Tennessee State University for pre-med when she went missing. On the 9th of September 1994, she was finishing her day working at the doctor's office and had called her mother to remind her that she would need a ride home at 8:30 PM. However, her mother had fallen asleep, and when she awoke at 1 AM, she noticed that Cleashindra hadn't come home. In a fright, her mother called the doctor's office where Cleashindra's boss told her that she had gotten a ride home already. However, when she asked Cleashindra's co-workers, they all had said that she had walked home, even though her house was too far away to walk. When Cleashindra failed to turn up for school the next day, the police were informed and all of her friends, co-workers and her boss were questioned. Her boyfriend was given a polygraph and passed. However, her boss outright refused to take one, which led to suspicion. It is thought that Cleashindra was the victim of foul play and must have known the person who took her. However, there is simply no evidence as to what happened. She left work and just disappeared, never to be seen again. This next case is shrouded in mystery and strange circumstances from the day Garnell Moore was born. Garnell's father was a drifter and his mother was in jail. At 6 years old, he was handed off to a neighbour, Belinda Cash, who gladly took him in. The whole process was very informal, with no professionals involved, and Garnell was never enrolled into school or any community programs. In August 2002, one of Garnell's great aunts saw him playing near Cash's home in Baltimore, Maryland, and asked to visit with him. However, Cash told her that they were in the middle of moving and that it would be very inconvenient. The visit was never rescheduled. In 2005, a couple of Garnell's family members came looking for him, but Cash first stated that he was on a school trip, despite the school being out for summer. The family members called the police, who then questioned Cash, who later stated that Garnell wasn't with her anymore. Apparently, Cash claimed that she had dropped Garnell at a social services building in West Baltimore. However, there was no social services in or near the address she gave. The police searched the house where Cash and Garnell had previously lived, but found no trace of the boy. Cash was instructed to carry out a polygraph, and surprisingly, she passed, supporting her claim that she had never touched Garnell. However, she refused to give information about what happened to him. To date, Garnell Moore has not been seen since. On the 20th of September 1988, Tara Calico went for a daily bike ride in Belen, New Mexico, but sadly she never came home. Her mother usually accompanied her on the bike rides, but stopped once she felt like she was being stalked by a driver. However, she attempted to get Tara to carry mace every time she went, but Tara always refused. On the day Tara went missing, her mother went looking for her along the usual trail, but instead of finding her daughter, she found broken pieces of her Walkman and a cassette tape. Reportedly, several people had seen Tara on her bike, which was never found, but one person had actually witnessed Tara being abducted. They had seen a light-coloured pickup truck seemingly following her. On the 15th of June 1989, a Polaroid photo of a young woman and a young boy bound and gagged was found in a parking lot of a convenience store in Florida. It was thought that the photo had been taken after May of 1989 due to the type of film not being available until that time. Tara's mother was shown the photo and was positive that the woman in the photo was her daughter due to a scar on her leg caused by a car accident. The boy in the photo was believed to be missing Michael Henley, also from New Mexico, but this theory was later disproved due to Michael's remains later being found in a forest a few miles from where he had disappeared. The case of Tara Calico remains unsolved. The cold case of Stacey Arras is a strange one. On the 17th July 1981, Stacey and her father were a part of a group of 6 riding horseback into Sunrise High Sierra Camp. The camp was built in 1961, offering an alluring destination for tourists and a stunning wilderness. When they had come back from their ride that one afternoon, Stacey had told her father that she was going to take some photos of the nearby lake. Her father decided not to go, and instead, an elderly man from their group accompanied Stacey. However, the 77-year-old quickly grew tired and stopped, telling Stacey to carry on and that he would meet her. Later, the group's tour guide had remembered seeing her head towards the lake and stated she was standing on a rock about 50 yards south of the trail. This was the last time anyone saw Stacey. She vanished that day with no lead or trace to her whereabouts. It is documented that the only thing police found was her camera lens. In 1912, Bobby Dunbar disappeared whilst fishing with his parents at a lake in Louisiana. The police were quickly notified, and after searching for Bobby for 8 months, finally found William Cantwell Walters, who was travelling with a boy who looked identical to Bobby. However, Walters claimed that the boy was the son of a friend who had given him custody over the child, and that his actual name was Bruce Anderson, not Bobby Dunbar. Bobby's parents were contacted, and after a positive ID, the child was given over to the parents, followed by a celebration parade put on by the town. Walters took the Dunbars to court, and during the trial, a woman named Julia Anderson came forward to defend Walters, claiming that the child was indeed her son Bruce, and she in fact had given Walters custody. However, the court dismissed her due to having 3 children out of wedlock, and 2 of her children were deceased. Eventually, Anderson gave up due to financial problems. In 2008, one of Bobby's granddaughters had a DNA test conducted, comparing her supposed grandfather's DNA to his own brother's. The DNA results didn't match. So there were 5 strange, unsolved missing person cases. What do you think? If you're interested in reading more, please visit the description. The sources are linked down there. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you have a great day, or evening, depending on where you are. In the early 2000s, a man named James Vickery claimed he uncovered a form of mind control through the use of persuasive subliminal messaging. James partnered with numerous movie theatres and would introduce the word thirsty for a split second at random intervals throughout the films. He claimed that this method made the moviegoers thirsty and that drinks saw a massive increase in sales. These claims, however, turned out to be false, but some important findings were discovered as a result of his lies. It was found that while you cannot imprint a new feeling onto a person using this method, you can exaggerate already existing current feelings, such as making someone thirstier if they already feel thirsty. This discovery, however, pales in comparison to what the CIA were able to achieve. Project MKUltra, also known as the CIA Mind Control Program, was the codename given to the program of human experimentation. These experiments were often illegal and were intended to develop drugs and procedures to be used in interrogations in order to weaken the individual and force confessions through mind control. This project was organised through the CIA and coordinated with the US Army Biological Warfare Laboratories. At the height of the Cold War, during the 1950s and 60s, the US government was very fearful about the possibility that Soviet, Chinese and North Korean agents were using mind control to brainwash US prisoners of war in Korea. To combat this perceived threat, the CIA partnered with a Swiss manufacturer and began producing LSD for the MKUltra program in the hope that they could force people to take the drug and convince them to do unspeakable acts. Testing started with unwilling participants being lured into a hotel room by prostitutes, who would then slip the drugs into their drinks. The CIA would then watch the test subjects as they tripped out behind a screen wall of the hotel room. The particular project within MKUltra that the prostitutes were involved with was called Midnight Climax. This eventually turned into full-blown brothels in the US run by the CIA, whereby the women working there would lure men into them, but instead of receiving sexual favours, were unknowingly drugged and then observed by the And, to be clear, MKUltra was not an unsuccessful program. The CIA were able to successfully mind control many victims, many of whom were children. According to official sources, Project MKUltra ran from the 1950s until the mid-1970s, but many theorists believe that aspects of the program are still occurring today. Investigative efforts were hampered by the fact that the CIA director, Richard Helms, ordered all MKUltra files to be destroyed in 1973, though this is hardly surprising given the nature of the experiments. It wasn't uncommon for unwilling patients to be forced into sensory deprivation or electroshock therapy. Of course, the test subjects reacted negatively, with many ending up permanently comatose. Experimenters would drug their victims to sleep for weeks on end, waking them daily only to administer violent electric shocks to the brain. Patients lost all or part of their memories, and some lost the ability to control their bodily functions and to The simulation hypothesis, the idea that our reality, our universe, and our lives are not real and are nothing more than a simulation, has been around for centuries. French philosopher René Descartes questioned the nature of reality and wrote about how free will may be an illusion and that our minds may be controlled from a laboratory. Of course, at first glance this may seem ridiculous, but since then technology has advanced dramatically, along with the rise of AI, so much so that many people have been swayed by the notion that we are living inside a virtual reality. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom was the first to present a trilemma to the general population, which he dubbed the simulation argument. Despite the name, Bostrom is not directly arguing that we are living inside a simulation, but instead is arguing that one of the following three things is almost certainly true. The fraction of civilizations that make it to the advanced stage of being able to run such simulated universes is very close to zero. Or, the fraction of these civilizations that are interested in creating simulated universes is very close to zero. Or, the fraction of all people with our kind of experiences are living inside a simulation is very close to 1. It has been argued that, if you are to assume any rate of progress at all in computing power, then at some point, future generations will have access to computers so powerful that you will not be able to distinguish between real life and a simulation, or video game running on such a machine. Furthermore, if you are also to assume any rate of progress in the development of artificial intelligence, then at some point an artificial consciousness will be possible to create, or at the very least, something which resembles that of free will be made possible. The argument would therefore continue, what is to say this hasn't already happened? That is, in base reality, or rather the original, real universe, civilizations have advanced to the point of creating such computers and in the process creating our reality and universe inside of one such computer. The argument could then be taken a step further. What if, inside the simulations, races advance to the point of creating their own simulations too? If you were to throw a dart, is it more likely to hit the original, real, base reality or a simulated reality? That would mean that the overwhelming majority of life is not living in the true, real reality, but is instead living inside a simulation, or a simulation inside a simulation, Inception style. Will it dawn on humanity that we are living inside a simulation the day we create our own? Who knows? In any case, an argument is one thing, but is there any proof that we are living inside a simulation? Possibly. First, let's take a moment to understand how our own games and simulations work today. When you are playing The Witcher 3, your general vicinity is packed with immense detail, civilization, monsters, beautiful looking scenery, and busy, simulated life. But what about the locations within the game where you are not present? Does the immense detail persist? Do citizens continue with their day-to-day life? No, this simulation is an illusion designed for you and what surrounds you. Everything that you cannot see is either rendered very simply or not at all. That includes things behind you, above you, and below you. But you would never know this because the computing and graphical power we have today is able to render it back to immense detail as you look at it with immense speed, meaning you'd never know. Games and simulations are created this way to reduce the load on the computer so that the graphics we have become accustomed to are made possible. So, is it possible this very same principle would be used to some extent in a simulated reality? Maybe. In 1801, Thomas Young was the first to perform the double-slit experiment. This was well before quantum mechanics and the concept of wave-particle duality. This was how Young proved that light was a wave rather than individual particles, because when shining light through the two slits, you can observe the wave interacting with itself. Instead of creating two strips of light, a number of interfering strips appear on the screen, meaning that light cannot possibly be fired particles as it wouldn't behave in this manner. One assumption was that light, protons, and electrons are in fact individual particles, but the particles interact with one another somehow, causing them to fly apart and create the disturbance. An experiment was then devised to test this. Electrons would be fired single file at the opening of the slits, and the impossible happened. The disturbance pattern reappeared, meaning that the electron passed through both slits at the same time. To find out what was happening and which slit the electron was actually passing through, the researchers then set up measurement devices to record the precise location of the electrons. This only served to confuse things even further, as another impossibility happened. The electrons stopped passing through both slits at the same time and began behaving as you would expect, only passing through one of the slits at a time, creating a single file pattern on the screen the way you'd expect, depending on the slit it passed through. This left the researchers with the frightening possibility that their act of consciously observing this event was somehow changing it, stopping the electrons from behaving like waves and instead behaving like individual particles. So, is this direct proof of the simulation? Perhaps not. But you can infer from the findings that when the universe on its smallest scale is not being directly observed by consciousness, it is using the simplified method of waves compared to the more computation-heavy particles, as each particle would need more computational power in terms of figuring out the trajectory, speed, orientation, direction, collisions, and etc. And it could be possible that the simulation computer is not powerful enough to render and compute this for every single particle in the universe, which, as earlier stated, is the same principle of optimization that developers use for our games today, only providing the immense detail when required, i.e., when an observer is looking at it, as to not break the illusion of the simulated reality. It's important to understand that the results of this experiment were published in 1803, at a time when a simulated reality couldn't even have been imagined. Over the years, various explanations have been offered to explain the results of this experiment, including the famous Copenhagen effect, which states that the elementary particles are both waves and particles, though fails to explain why the act of an observer changed the behaviour of the electrons. Another explanation offered was that, simply put, it is impossible to measure this experiment as the measurement equipment must be